Okay, album number two, the third time we're going to be covering Alice in Chains, and it's their third full-length studio album. They, of course, have quite a few EPs,
Hmm.
and this is going to be the self-titled by Alice in Chains. We've covered Facelift and Dirt before. This is, unlike the other two albums this week, this is an album I'm very, very familiar with. I own this album and can definitely remember it has a very distinct look of the cover. It was like purple and green and like, yeah, had a really interesting cover. I would say borderline ugly cover would be how
Oh
I
yeah.
describe this.
Yes.
So I'll give you first take, Josh. How familiar were you with this one?
Not familiar at all.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I really feel like I only knew Alice in Chains from some of the songs we covered on the previous albums. I never
Oh,
really.
from Combing the Stacks.
Yeah. I wasn't.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think I was familiar with them enough that they were one of the big kind of grunge rock bands, or lumped in with that grunge rock sound. We've talked about that before, but I was never really into them at all. I thought this album was pretty effective. I mean, it's got the classic kind of sound that Alice in Chains has, where they have this real heaviness to them. I would say the heaviest, or maybe the heaviest of those four bands, which would be Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains. They continue to have kind of the standout thing for them, for me, is always their harmonizing. They really have good harmonizing between the singers. There's really good production on this album too. I think it sounds really well, but they always have this, like despairing feeling to their sound. Depression, I think you said before.
Yes.
Like you can feel like the drugs are impacting how the sound, or what I think you frame it as, like, this is the sound that drugs are, or something like that. That's kind of the feeling.
Dirt in particular, but
Yeah.
yes, them in general.
So, but I think this is, if you like Alice in Chains, you're going to like this album. I don't know. I have a hard time differentiating, like, what separates this from their other albums, like how they've evolved as artists, or if they're trying something new. I feel like it does sound similar to their other albums, but that's not a bad thing necessarily, because they're really good artists, and their sound is really interesting. The standout songs for me would be Grind, the opening track. I like Brush Away. There's this interesting like descending guitar part in that. I like the Heaven Beside You, which is the fourth track and is a ballad, and they have it kind of has a lighter feel to it, and then it like immediately goes heavy after the chorus, which is really interesting. And I also like, again, a lot, they got this
That's like every one of the singles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's that's why they're the singles, right? I'm no production or record label, but I also like, and again, when they're like, they do this thing where like the sound drops out and they start hitting the cymbal, and then it builds up to again. I guess Alice in Chains is best because they've got like this like almost metal sounding riff background, and then they layer on that with the harmonizing and this kind of, I don't know, not disaffected, but I don't know, strung out quality. I mean, Elaine Staley was on heroin, right? To it. But I like this album. I think I liked the other albums more this week. I'm glad we revisited them. What did you think about Alice in Chains in this album?
It's interesting that you think of this one being so similar to the other ones, because I think of each of the Alice in Chains albums being very different. I feel
Okay.
like the first Facelift album is as much like an homage to the 80s in some ways. It's got a lot of like metal to it still, and still a little bit more vestiges of like, 80s metal along the way. And you're beginning to see the beginning of what they become, but it's much more in that lane. Whereas Dirt, I feel like, is very much grunge mixed with metal, and of its time, right? Like when you talk about like what's a grunge album of the early 90s, it's bleak, it's dark throughout it's heavy, it like hangs over you. This album thematically is just as dark, but it sounds much more polished and clean. And I always attributed this album much more to them like trying to reach for like a more mainstream sound. Songs like you mentioned, Grind and Again, right, are songs that are very clean compared to what was on Dirt. Because Dirt, even when the production was clean, there was just like a heaviness to it that didn't really give it commercial viability, I'd say. Like sometimes it would go into like Wood, right, and stuff where it would get there, but you kind of recognize them as unusual commercial songs. Here, you have a lot of, I think, and they had a lot of singles on this. You have a lot of like reaches for that type of sound, I'd say. Then you have stuff on this album, like some of the deeper cut. Sludge Factory is just an unusual sound, I'd say. It's a lot more indebted to what Dirt sounds like, and it stands out on this album much more. Now, a couple songs I like on this album are later in it. Like I love the closer, Over Now, has always been a song I love. It's this very dark, like close to the album, and it was also great on the Unplugged album when they did it. It's got that haunting guitar that sort of just trails off for the last few minutes. It's a longer song, 7:03. In fact, the last three songs are all long. Nothing Song, Frogs, and Over Now. I've always liked Nothing Song as well. It takes a very interesting angle, and it's a display a little bit of the harmonizing of Jerry Cantrell and Lane Staley in such a pleasing way for me, but it's almost discordant because they're singing beautiful cohesion on the harmonies, but the part that Lane Staley is singing has like an unhinged nature to it, where behind it Jerry Cantrell's singing much more measured. So I like that because it kind of feels a little bit like Insanity as that's going on. So this whole album, I would say I like this better than Facelift, but I don't like it as much as Dirt. It's an album that I know is like polarizing for Alice in Chains fans themselves, because there's a lot of their DNA in here, but also I've always heard it described as like there's just something missing in the formula a little bit here, and I kind of get what people mean as I went back and listened to this, because it's hard to do a second really bleak album like Dirt, right? And in doing it, you got to kind of take a different angle. And I feel like Alice in Chains knew that, but the angle they took is less effective than Dirt. It's not ineffective, but it's less effective. But when they nail the formula, like something like Heaven Beside You or Over Now, like they really nail it. And I feel like it's the more slow, dirgy songs that stick with me more than the more aggressive up-tempo songs on this album. And that is not necessarily the case on Wood. I feel like Wood has the perfect balance, where the balance spins more to the ballad understated songs. So still a recommendation, and my favorite of the three albums we covered this week. But I think the word inconsistent would be well applied to this one.
Do you feel like with Alice in Chains that you kind of respond or impacted by kind of the lyrical content of their sound, or is it really their music that carries you through?
On Dirt, it's both. Yeah. On Dirt, it's both. On this one, it depends on the song. Like a song like Heaven Beside You, the lyrical content does, and Over Now, like for sure. Some of the other ones, like a song like Grind, not as much, because that's really just, it's what it sounds like. It's a grinding guitar sound, right? But I always pay attention to their lyrics, and it's kind of like when you want to feel depressed, right? Like Alice in Chains is a good band to go to, because the sonically they meet, and the poetry of the lyrics, right, like can meet you there. So I guess that's a long way of saying both, but I do think the sound of them is the first thing that always, when I'm thinking of putting on an Alice in Chains album, the first thing I'm thinking of is like what the album sounds like, more so than the lyrics.
Yeah, I think when I listen to an Alice in Chains album as a whole, it kind of adds up, and it starts to feel a little like oppressive or claustrophobic. I think on some like sort of subconscious level, what they're writing about kind of gets under my skin or something. In the same, I've had this impact with other albums, but I do kind of like their sound too. So it's this real like push pull when I listen to them.
I always enjoy Alice in Chains most when I'm not feeling as good as I would want to. That's a difficult lane, you know, because it's like you don't want to feel like that, right? But I also am glad that music like this listens. And, you know, Matt has talked about, you know, that he'll pick music that speaks to how he feels, right? And he's probably, I think, of the three of us, the most optimistic in terms of worldview a little bit. So there's he will keep himself away from certain sounds, right? Because like it's like I don't ever want to feel like that, and I don't think I do very often, right? Whereas for me, I don't necessarily keep it away, but also, it would be hard. And this week, same. But I knew that going in this week, so like I put this on when I was in the right headspace for it. Like this was not like feeling pretty good in the morning, drive-in music, or even like at night, like when, you know, the day went well type music. That I picked my shots when I was listening to this. So.
Okay. Yeah. Good. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely.